come discover the amazing, multifaceted persona, so much for us to learn from and emulate, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka Schneerson. Today was the 22nd day in the Jewish month of Shvat. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife, who we refer to as Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, her name was Chaya Mushka Schneerson. She was born a Schneerson and she married a Schneerson, and I believe all of her relatives' names were Schneerson. Her mother, I think, was native of Schneerson. Her father was obviously native of Schneerson. Her husband was native of Schneerson. So Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka Schneerson was an amazing person, an amazing, as we say in the Hebrew, tzadekes, perfectly righteous woman of so many strengths and talents and virtues, so much to learn from, so much to talk about, and we don't have that much time. Considering that she was a woman who really tried to avoid any recognition, avoid anyone knowing who she was and what she was. And for most of the world, and even most of the Lubavitch world, people didn't know her at all until she passed away. People didn't know what she looked like. People wouldn't have recognized her if she was on the street. But after her passing, people started sharing. More and more came out. Of course, far more than we know, we don't know. But from we know, there's much we can apply to ourselves. So what I wanted to do, because it was so hard to pick, well, what aspect should I focus on? Which story should I tell? There's so many stories. So I decided not to tell too many. And instead, I just wanted to bring a few different aspects, 9 different aspects actually, from the whole panorama of her persona. And then afterwards, hopefully, we can talk. We can discuss the ones that resonated with us. We can discuss how we too can grow and become closer to the model she's sharing with us. Now, just before all this, just as the introduction, after her passing, of course, we know in the Jewish law, we sit Shiva, which means there's a 7-day period of mourning. And when you sit and you're mourning, people come to console you and they talk to you and give you comfort. So believe it or not, this was done by the Lubavitcher Rebbe as well.
This meeting is being recorded.
The Lubavitcher Rebbe was sitting. People were coming and giving comfort, sharing, talking. And there was a man that came by. It was a certain important person. And he said, oh, I heard she was a wonderful person. And the Rebbe responded, and this is on tape. You can actually hear the Rebbe saying this. The Rebbe said, in my opinion, that is an underestimation. And the Rebbe repeated it, in my opinion, that's an underestimation. That is underestimated. Now, it's amazing because the Rebbe, who absolutely knew and who absolutely would not exaggerate, this is how he's describing his wife, the Rebbetzin. To say she was wonderful person now, that's an underestimation. You don't get her at all. When I was trying to think, as I said, it was very hard to screen from everything I'm flooded with, especially today, when for the past many hours, just been listening to things about her, listening to more about her. So many ideas in my head. But the first thing that I felt I was definitely going to say, of anything I was going to say, is that anyone that knew her, if they knew her very intimately and well and spent hours with her and knew her for years, or if they met her exactly once, everyone, if they were a relative, if they were an acquaintance, if they view themselves as a friend, if they were a worker, they all said the same thing. There was one common thread that everyone said, no matter how close or how not close, how many times or how few times, everyone had a certain impression they all walked away with, which was her care, her understanding of them, of people, her acceptance, no matter who they were, and her love. Those qualities somehow everyone got. Oh, the Rebbetzin, no one cared like the Rebbetzin. Nobody understood like the Rebbetzin. No one accepted like the Rebbetzin. No one so freely loved like the Rebbetzin. This was the overwhelming message. And I really thought, therefore, it was the first thing I wanted to say in case you forget everything else. But as a model for us, this is what she embodied. A totally different aspect, or honestly, totally different, but from a different perspective. There was a woman who was actually very close to the Rebbetzin, relatively speaking. Her name was Louis Hager. Maybe I could give you the backstory of how she became close, but I think that's actually a very interesting point as well. She was from England, and her father, I believe it was her father at one point, was very ill and wrote in to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or maybe there was a phone call to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a blessing. And he completely recovered. After this, came from England to say thank you to the Rebbe. And this was a long time ago. This was like probably in the, maybe late 60s or 60s. And when the Rebbetzin heard about this family from England that flew in to say thank you, she was like, I want to meet them. I'm inviting them in, because she said that's so unusual. People always ask for blessings, and people always receive blessings. And many people see incredible miracles, but how rare is it for someone to travel a far distance to say thank you? So that began the relationship of Louis Hager's parents and the Rebbetzin. She visited the Rebbetzin for the first time when she was 14. And she was very close to her all the years. She viewed her as like her surrogate grandmother. They would speak frequently on the phone, and had truly a very close relationship. So after the Rebbetzin passed away, suddenly everyone's talking about the Rebbetzin. When the Rebbetzin was alive, nobody spoke about the Rebbetzin. That was taboo. They knew the Rebbetzin didn't want it. Once she passed away, people started feeling free to talk about the Rebbetzin. So this Louis Hager would speak. She's a very beautiful woman, very elegant speaker, and she had much to share about her relationship with the Rebbetzin. The first time she spoke, she wanted to make sure she was saying the right thing and not saying something that she shouldn't share. She actually took an entire copy of her speech and sent it to the Rebbe for the Rebbe's approval before she spoke. And she came to New York, she spoke, and that Sunday, I don't remember if it was before or after the speech, she went by the Rebbe in the Sunday dollars lines, where I'm sure you heard of the concept that people could go by and receive blessings from the Rebbe, or even like little mini audiences from the Rebbe as they're walking by. So she said to the Rebbe, I think she had already spoken, or maybe she was going to speak about the Rebbetzin, and to emphasize how the Rebbetzin always maybe taught her or emphasized the virtues of being a mother, of being a homemaker. And the Rebbe added, and being a wife. She didn't say it. The Rebbe added that. This really was a message she consistently gave the women she spoke to, whoever were those women, whoever merited to have a relationship with her, big or small. Don't forget, never undervalue, be a wife. Of course, we know we have to focus on being the right mother, and we know we have to be a homemaker. And those are very, very valuable jobs, very important jobs. Foundation of the Jewish people is educating the next generation, but never forget, be a wife. Very valuable, loud, strong message the Rebbetzin would consistently convey. Another idea I wanted to share, I think is very special about her, and this is actually based on something the Rebbe says about her in a talk 4 years after her passing. She passed away in 1988. This was in 1992. That she was perfectly balanced. Now, the Rebbe doesn't say she was perfectly balanced, but what the Rebbe says, which expresses this, is her name. A name expresses your essence. Her name was Chaya Mushka. And the Rebbe goes on many, many levels, like 5 levels of explaining what's Chaya, what's Mushka, what's Chaya, what's Mushka, what's Chaya, Mushka, all in terms of our spiritual powers. And I'm not going to go into the details, don't worry. But the idea is there's a balance. Chaya is in general powers that are more within. Mushka are powers that are more encompassing. She had the within of Chaya, the without of Mushka. And on another level, she had the within of Chaya and the encompassing of Mushka. And on another level, she had the within of Chaya and the encompassing of Mushka. And on another level, she had the within of Chaya and the encompassing of Mushka. There was always a balance. We even see this on the date of her passing, the 22nd of Shvat. Again, and I don't want to go into the whole theology behind it. You could trust me on this, but the date is very significant and really expresses her energy of that perfect balance. 22 has a significance. Shvat is the 11th month, has a significance. The synergy of 11 in month, 22 in day, it expresses again this perfect balance. And that's very unusual because she was a genius. She was a genius in her mind, as we'll touch on in a while. She was a genius in emotional intelligence, as everyone that knew her could attest. Not everyone could attest that she was a genius intellectually because she rarely shared that with people. She was a genius in people. She knew, understood, got you in a second, knew exactly what to say and how to say it. But generally, geniuses are not very balanced. Geniuses are like extreme in one area and very often deficient in other areas. So a genius, someone who's really stellar in something, it's usually at a cost in something else. But she was a genius in many areas and balanced. She was so balanced that her name, which is expressing her essence, expresses this true inner and outer balance, which I thought was a very powerful lesson for us as well. Something else that almost everyone said, or really I'd say everyone who spoke to her and therefore afterwards about her, very often brought out this point. And I thought it was just a very special point for us to think about in terms of ourselves and our relationships with people. That whenever she was with someone, it was never about her. It was always about the other person. If you're interested, I could share so many stories because so many people sharing their own personal stories with her all brought out that point. It was so loud and clear. This isn't about her. She's not doing this for her. She's doing this for me. She's doing this for the other person. And when she spoke with someone, when she met someone, when she had someone at her house, her attention was completely focused on them. It was about the other person feeling good. She never directed the conversation in a way for her benefit, for her to feel good, for her to gain. It was always about how can she make the other person feel good. And again, I'll touch this on later because this was just so many stories and incidences brought this out. And I thought it was a beautiful point for us to think about in terms of ourselves. How often when I relate to someone, is it for me? And how often is it for the other person? And how often is it purely and only for the other? Another idea, just to balance all this human understanding with a little spiritual understanding. The doctor of Crown Heights, there were, of course, now there are many doctors in Crown Heights, but at this time, he probably was the main, if not for a while, only doctor. He just very recently passed away, a few months ago, actually. His name was Dr. Feldman. And he had a close relationship to the Rebbitzin as being the doctor. And he would say that she had prophetic spirit. She had divine spirits about her. How did he know this? I mean, sure, it was true. I have no question about it. But I mean, you know, there's many stories of her holiness, of her ability to bless people. But how did he know she had what we call Ruach HaKodesh, prophetic spirit? So what he said, his understanding of it, his vantage point was that she would often call him because she was concerned because someone was sick in the community of Crown Heights. And she'd speak about the person and she wanted to make sure he was getting the attention he needed and he was going to get better and the proper medical care. And every time Dr. Feldman was like, how does she know? She doesn't know these people. She never was close. She was very much a recluse in Crown Heights. She would go out, but never in the neighborhood. She never wanted to be recognized. She never wanted honor. She never wanted attention. She never wanted people to look at her. She never wanted people to do things for her. So she basically avoided Crown Heights. She lived in Crown Heights. If she would go shop, it was in Manhattan. It wasn't in Crown Heights. If she would go, whatever she would leave her house, which of course she left her house, but it was never to be in the neighborhood of Crown Heights. She never went to the synagogue. She never went to the public gatherings. She didn't want that honor. She didn't want that attention. She very much put herself aside for the Rebbe, and she never wanted any attention on herself. So he's thinking, how does she know these people? Never mind, does she know they're sick? How does she know their name? How does she know anything about them? But somehow, without ever leaving her house, without ever going shopping in Crown Heights, on the stores of Crown Heights, in the synagogues of Crown Heights, in the gatherings of Crown Heights, in the studies halls of Crown Heights, she had her finger on the pulse of everyone and was very, very concerned, really wanted to know, how is this person doing? Is someone taking care of their medical situation? She knew them and she cared. She really loved them. People that worked in the house of the Rebbitzin, and they really, of course, saw her for years on a very regular basis. And they have many stories. I'm just going to share one person, just a few. I mean, he speaks for hours. Just a few ideas, just again, to bring out who she was and how he processed this. Now, I just want to put in perspective, which I think really highlights the point of her, who she was, that when he started working for her and these memories that he's sharing, he was about 16 years old. He was a 6-year-old boy from France, came to America, very far from his own home, nobody really taking care of him. And he didn't really have the ability to sit and learn. He wasn't really focused. So he was maybe running around a bit. Some people like to be what we call a macher, a doer. They're going to take charge and, they'll chop down a tree, but they're not going to sit and learn for a few hours. He was that personality. So he wasn't really doing much learning and he was running around. So it was suggested he should go and help the Rebbetzin, let's put him to some good use. And here he is, a 16-year-old boy. He couldn't drive her around because he didn't know how to drive. But he did some things in the house for her. He ran errands for her. And this struck me very much. Maybe because I personally really need to work on this. She was so careful with his time. If they were supposed to meet, he was supposed to do something for her, and they made up a time, and she wasn't available, she would always apologize. She would reach out to him. She would call. She would apologize for being late. He's waiting for her. So she has to be so careful with his time. And he's like thinking, lady, he probably actually said it to her. I don't do anything with my time anyway. I'm not sitting and learning. I'm not holding a job. I'm not at home and helping my parents. I trouble, so to speak. I get involved in things. I'm doing nothing. I got plenty of time. No, she could never view it like that. Time, someone else's time is very, very precious. Someone else's time is something we respect. And here she is like royalty, and he's a 16-year-old kid, and she respected his time. She also respected him. Of course, not in the English language, but I'm sure in the Russian language and definitely in the Yiddish language. When you speak to a person you respect, you speak in the third person, which of course English does not. America wouldn't know from that. But when she would speak to the 16-year-old kid, she always spoke in the third person. She's a lady, an older lady, a lady of very regal ancestry and position. He's a 16-year-old kid, and she always addressed him in the third person. Again, I think it just expresses what real Jewish royalty is. Real Jewish royalty treats everyone else like royalty. Real Jewish royalty looks at everyone else and gives them respect instead of assuming any respect for themselves. And in general, here he was there to help her. She would never, ever ask help for anything she could do herself. And if she ever did ask for help, which is what he was there for, she always apologized a few times before, during, and after. He's thinking, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to help you. You never want me to help you. And if you do ask for help, she always felt the need to apologize because she sincerely felt bad. She was taking his time to help her. I guess a story with him, I bring this up for a different reason, just to get a quality of hers that I thought was amazing, really showing who she is. After the Rebbe had a heart attack in the fall of 1977, there was a doctor, actually a cardiologist from Chicago, Dr. Ira Weiss, who became the personal cardiologist, physician of the doctor, of the Rebbe, and through the Rebbe, the Rebbetzin. And Dr. Weiss would call every day around 7 o'clock to speak to the Rebbetzin, how's she doing, how the Rebbe's doing. And the Rebbetzin every time was always the same conversation. Whenever he'd call, she'd always say, can I call you back? Remember, in those days, it was about $2 a minute to call long distance. She felt bad for his dimes. Can I call you back? He never allowed that. So she always spoke so briefly. She was always didn't want to waste his money, $2 a minute, and his time. He's calling. He wants to talk. She always spoke very, very briefly because she didn't want to take his money. She didn't want to take his time. Sometimes when he called, if the Rebbetzin didn't pick up the phone and this Mendel Nutzik was around, this kid, he would answer. And then he would talk. Then they would have long conversations. Mendel Nutzik isn't worrying about his money. He doesn't care. He's not worrying about wasting his dollars. And actually, those were very good conversations for Dr. Weiss because he wanted to know. The Rebbetzin was being so brief, he didn't get the information he wanted. So he spoke to Mendel Nutzik. He'd speak for a long time, asking a lot of questions about the Rebbe, a lot of questions about the Rebbetzin. And afterwards, he would speak, again, very briefly to the Rebbetzin. So one time this happened, and Mendel Nutzik picked up the phone. He was in the next room, and the Rebbetzin hadn't picked up the phone, and he started him for a long, long time. And then they finished. Okay, now let's go. Mendel Nutzik goes to the kitchen to tell the Rebbetzin. And the Rebbetzin hears this, it's Dr. Weiss. She's like running to talk to him, running, pick up the phone. And again, can I call you back? The same routine. No. Okay. Speaks very briefly, doesn't want to waste his time or his money. She hangs up the phone. And then she says to Mendel Nutzik, she said, if I had known Dr. Weiss was on the phone, I would have come. I feel so bad. He's wasting his time and his money like this. So he said to her, you didn't realize, he was a kid, so he wasn't obviously talking as respectfully as a person should talk. He said, you didn't realize I was talking to Dr. Weiss? She's like, no, I didn't realize. He said, so who did you think I was talking to? Gonsberg. Gonsberg was the name of another person that worked in the house. Now, Mendel Nutzik's native language was Yiddish. He doesn't come from America, he comes from France. Whenever he spoke to the Rebbetzin, he always spoke in Yiddish. And whenever he spoke to Gonsberg, who also came from Russia and France, he was speaking Yiddish. So he said, if I was speaking to Gonsberg, I would have been speaking in Yiddish. You heard I was talking in English the whole time. So she answered, I thought this was an incredible idea. She said, I learned in my father's house not to hear what's not meant for you to hear. She was sitting in the next room. He wasn't whispering. His voice was audible. She didn't hear it. She knew he's speaking to someone, so she assumed it was a friend. So she shut down her hearing. She deliberately didn't hear a word he said because it's not relevant to me. I should pry into your business. I should listen to your conversation. I can so control my senses. I didn't hear a word. So I didn't realize you were talking in English. That's why I thought you were talking to Gonsberg. Now, we obviously don't have the physical ability to do that. But how many times are our husbands on the phone and we're listening, like just to like figure out who he's talking to or what he's talking about, or maybe gain some information because he's not telling it to us. Or your child's on the phone and you're sort of listening to hear what's really going on in your child's life. Or how many times are you in a room with someone else and then how many times do we deliberately hear what's not meant for us to hear? I don't know. That was to me like a very strong message. And he told many stories. He speaks for hours about it. Just very often he felt the thing she told him was really for him. Like she once was teaching him how to water a tree that was bent over to straighten it up. And he's thinking, you're trying to tell me that I can also straighten myself up. Very often, very subtly, she would like do things along those lines. Another idea. This is as you might know, the Rebbe and Rebbetzin never had any physical biological children of their own. And more than once, sometimes lacking in sensitivity, sometimes being ignorant, people would ask her about this. But you'd think, like, come on, how would you speak to a woman about this? But people don't realize. Once a child was in her house. I actually know this child. He was in my house, I would say, as an older man. But when he was in her house, he was a child. And he whatever, it's a story again, how his family had a relationship to the Rebbetzin. His father had worked in the house of the Rebbetzin when he was a single man. Now he was married, they were living in Belgium. And when they would come to Crown Heights, they would visit, and he's there. He, of course, was told to be very, well-behaved. So he's trying to be very well-behaved. He's looking around at the house and he doesn't see any kids. So totally innocently, he's like, where are your children? Suddenly he notices his mother kicking him under the table. He's like, hey, what did I do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. He said, where are your children? And she said to him, my children are in 770, by which she meant, who are my children? Anyone who's a follower of the Rebbe, any person like that is a child of mine. So anyone that has relationship to Hasidus, anyone that has relationship to the Rebbe, which in a sense means all Jewish people, she was viewing as her children. And she truly treated every single person she met like that. like with that love, with that sense of my child. A story, but really embodying a lot of the points said before. This is with a woman also. I know this woman, so maybe that's why it made an impression on me, this story. This woman, her name is Vera Katak, currently in Ottawa, about my age, a woman I know. And many years before, when she had just become religious, she had left her town, her hometown of Minnesota. She had moved to Crown Heights. Not obviously now she's not with her family. She's not with any of her previous friends. Everyone thinks she's like crazy. What does she do? Adopt this religious lifestyle? And she went to learn in a school for women that are becoming religious in Crown Heights named Machon Chana. And she's in Machon Chana, and she's basically feeling like, I feel so alone. I feel like I don't know anyone. I feel like no one knows me. And she and her friends were just feeling sort of down and out about it. And they decided they were going to go straight to the top. And they wrote a letter to the Rebbetzin, which was unheard of, which nobody did. You can write letters to the Rebbe. Nobody wrote letters to the Rebbetzin. They wrote a letter. They knew where the house of the Rebbetzin was. It was actually just down the block from where they were living. They went to her mailbox and they put the letter in her mailbox. And I'm not going to say the whole long story, but basically the Rebbetzin got the letter and invited them to come over, set the table like for royalty, with crystal, with china, with beautiful things. But I just wanted to bring out this one point. One of the things that really struck Dvor Ketak when she met with the Rebbetzin is that the Rebbetzin didn't do the normal thing you do, meaning Dvorah and two of her friends, they're all people that grew up not Orthodox, had become what we call a Baal Tshuva, someone who is now returning to Judaism through the Chabad network somewhere out there in the world. And when you meet a person like that, very often you'd say to them, what's your story? How did you become religious? Here's the Rebbetzin. She's in her home. She doesn't go out. These three girls are like, so to speak, a product of her husband's work. So she would have, as we say, Shep Nachas, it would have given her joy, it would have given her pleasure to hear their story, to hear how her husband's network of shlichus, of emissaries all over the world, is bringing people back to Judaism. She didn't ask that at all. Because again, she never thought of her own benefit. When she was meeting with someone, it wasn't about for me. It was about for them. So she said, what do you like to do? What music do you like to listen to? She treated them with a lot of respect, these three young girls, a lot of sensitivity, a lot of focus. Like, I want to learn who you are because you're important to me. You're important, respectable people. Again, it was for their benefit. It was to give them the sense, I think you're important. Not, I want to gain what is in it for me. I think you're important. I want to focus on what's good for you. Just to balance all this out with the idea of her intellect and her abilities that, again, she kept so discreet. People, even people that knew her very well, barely knew. She was very close to her father, and people that knew both said she had her father's head. She had her father's brilliance. And we see this in the way her father regarded her. When the previous Rebbe, before he was arrested and then all his life was almost taken away, of course, we've discussed that at other times on the 12th of Tammuz, and then managed to leave Russia, there was so much pressure from the communists. There was such a sense that the communist government, the regime, is going to do something against him, that he legally wanted someone else to be responsible for all of his affairs. Because he knew, who knows, any day they'll come and take me. And then everything will fall apart because there's no one who has legal power over any of my affairs. So he wanted one person to have that legal power in case he's arrested, gone, invisible, God knows what, as of course did happen. He picked his daughter, his second daughter. He had three daughters. He didn't pick his wife. He didn't pick his mother. Both were alive and well. He didn't pick any of the older Hasidic figures. He didn't pick any of his secretaries, the people that were running these affairs. He picked his second daughter. She is the one that he chose to be legally in charge of all of his estates, of all of his affairs, which is a tremendous testimony, if we need one, to just what she was capable of. And very similarly, in a very similar vein, after his horrific incarceration, where his life was not taken, though they really wanted to, because for some reason they bowed to the tremendous international pressure put on them. And at that time in Russia, they bowed to nothing and pretended they couldn't care less about the world. but they actually gave in to the international pressure, which was a miracle and very unusual, spared his life. Then they were going to give him 5 years of harsh labor. Then, of course, they realized that wouldn't fly. So they sent him, 10 years of harsh labor. So they were sending him for 5 years to exile. And he was allowed to go to exile with very few people to accompany him, very few people. He chose one family member, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, from his whole family. Again, his mother, his wife, his other daughters, his son-in-law, other people. He picked Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka as a family member that would accompany him into exile. This was not a 5-year exile in the end. It was a few days, a week or so, basically. A little more than a week. But he chose for this official 5-year exile, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, which again shows us her enormous strengths. We've discussed here the court case over the books, and there was a deposition on her, a very long deposition, because the lawyers of the other side were really trying to get from her testimony that would be very damaging to the case. And the lawyers on the Rebbe's side were very concerned. I mean, she was an elderly lady at this point. These lawyers knew what they were doing. They were going to question her for hours, as they did, and he knew her tactics. They're going to wear her down and wear her down and wear her down and wear her down, and eventually they would get her to slip and say something that then they would use. And the lawyers were expressing to the Rebbe their concern about this deposition. The Rebbe said, don't worry. She's going to pass with flying colors. And she did. And actually, her testimony, instead of being damaging to the Rebbe's side, was one of the reasons that the judge ruled in favor of Lubavitch and the Rebbe's side. She passed with flying colors. And just so many details we know and don't know about that. Very interesting. Most people don't know that she was actually very learned on her own. She was an engineer on her own. When the Rebbe was in Sorbonne, she would do all the mathematical tables for him, so he didn't have to waste his time on them. When they came to America, she also worked. And actually, she patented a revolver that was used by the American Army during World War II. And she received royalties on that revolver for the rest of her life. It was something the American government, the American Army used for years and years and years, a revolver designed by the Rebbetzin. She wrote the science column in the children's Lubavitch publication. She just had many, many, many aspects to her. Again, most of which she didn't share with other people, but really expressed who she was. So I just touched very quickly on a lot of different ideas because there's so many ideas. And I wanted to give sort of a panorama, like a smorgasbord of different things to think about. And then if we could try to think, what in this is relevant to me? Why does any of this have to be relevant to you? Well, after the Rebbetzin passed away, the message the Lubavitcher Rebbe said again and again and again, which is really a Jewish message, not only about Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, it's a general message when someone passes away. So it's good for us to know in terms of anyone close to us or who we admire who passes away. There's a verse, and the living shall take to heart, which means that if someone passes away, we're supposed to think about them. We're supposed to think about all their special qualities, and we're supposed to take to heart their special qualities for us to become different people in the process, for them to live on through us. Because if someone passes away and you say, wow, she's like the most generous person I knew, and I'm going to become a little more generous to be like her. Well, now she, whoever that she is, lives on through you. Your new generosity is giving her life because her generosity is continuing through your generosity. And that's how it is with everyone. Anyone that we're close to, anyone that we care about, anyone that we admire. When they pass away, we're supposed to think about them, think about their virtues, and try to adopt a virtue or ascend on the ladder, our personal ladder in that virtue, so that they continue to live on through us. So from all these ideas I just shared about the Rebbetzin, and of course, as I said, we don't know far more than we know, and I didn't share far, far, far more than I shared. Any ideas? Anybody heard something that they resonated with, that they felt, that's something I'd like to achieve. That's something that I think I could achieve on some level, and a way I'd like to grow. Any ideas, any personal applications? When I was filtering through what to say, I was trying to think of things that I felt did have personal application. So hopefully there were things there that you related to. Maybe I'll just briefly highlight what I was saying, just to remind you, because you probably weren't taking notes. But I spoke about her care, understanding, acceptance, and love. I spoke about the idea of her prioritizing being a wife, about her being balanced, about her focusing on the other person, her wanting to make another person feel good when another person was there with her, about her care for people, her divine prophetic spirit, which I don't think we're going to emulate, but her care for people that officially she doesn't know and really wanting to make sure they were okay. Her care with other people's times, speaking to children in the third person, only asking for help if she needed it, not hearing what's not meant for her, delicately giving lessons to give someone a message without doing it in a way that would embarrass them, viewing really all Jews as her children, not asking for information that would make her feel good if it would make someone else feel not as good, focusing only on what would make the other person feel good, and her brilliance that she kept very, very, very hidden. Anything from that list now be remembered as like, if I'm going to pick something, I think that's what I would pick.
I would pick to be more, when I'm talking to people, to be much more about them than me. This is something that I resonated with me, that I could try to do it in her memory. But the biggest thing about her, what attracts me, how humble she was. It's just such an overwhelming, out of all those virtues, her being so humble is such an overriding feature.
You're absolutely right. And there's so much humility. Again, that was something I unfortunately did not touch on because there were so many things, but it also struck me, a woman who was very close to her, was distantly related to her, was close to her. She had received a present from the shluchos, all the female emissaries of Chabad. And she said literally to this woman that had a relationship with her, come to visit, I don't know, I feel so bad, they bothered, I'm just such a simple person. And she meant it sincerely. Like, why are they bothering giving me this gift? And she's like the other woman, her name was Mrs. Khan, is saying, what do you mean you're a simple person? Like, she's like, no. And again, she was so other focused. It was like, she was saying to Mrs. Khan, you don't know what these people are dealing with. They're in such far situations. They have no support system. They have to cook. There's no kosher. There's no education for their children. And her whole focus was she was so concerned about them, and they're taking time to give a present to simple little her. Like, she really meant it. That was exactly how she viewed it. So you're absolutely right. That was very overwhelming. But I felt also, if I could take that, if I could challenge myself to take such a resolution of, when you talk to another person, it shouldn't be for your gain, it should only be for theirs. To be so other-centered, so focused on making the other person feel good. Yeah, that was overarching. That was one of these just overarching themes everyone brought out, because it was so dominant in her. So a combination of her own selflessness and her own tremendous love, real love for other people. And yeah, I agree. But there were a lot of other details I thought were also resonated a lot with me. Anyone else had something they heard that they thought like, hey, I'd like to work on that, or that's something I could strive to achieve, or that would be a beautiful trait to acquire? Never thought of that one, or to improve on?
I am with Rivka. That's also, I was thinking about the same thing. When you when I talk to other people, it shouldn't be about me. Focusing on other people, make other people important. I also think that's something I would.
So
like.
You're saying that I think it's a great idea. Rivka's saying that. How do you think you're going to do it? Like, now I'm trying to get practical. What am I going to change? You think it's just a mindset? What would you do, Chava?
No, it's conscious effort not to talk about myself, right? Like, we have, I don't know, I know I have a tendency when a person tells me something, I'm like trying to give example from my life or what I know or whatever, right? So it's like, instead of completely giving them space, giving them time and asking more questions, instead of like telling something, asking questions, so to promote them to speak more about whatever they're talking about.
That's interesting because you're saying when we jump in, oh, that reminds me. Yeah, I had a similar incident. Oh, I remember that happened to me. We're sort of shifting the spotlight back on ourselves. Even though we're officially talking about them, but we're really shifting the spotlight to us.
Right.
That's practical. that I can relate to. That's a good tip, you know, like, because we do have a tendency to becomes about you. I thought like what this K-Tech was saying, this idea of even if you're asking the other person questions, so they're talking, she was saying it struck her very much how the Rebbetzin did not ask her for her story because she felt sharing her story would have just been for the Rebbetzin, so to speak, glorification. Like it would have made the Rebbetzin feel good to hear that story, but it wouldn't have necessarily made this girl feel better. So even when she was talking to her and asking her questions, she was thinking of questions that expressed you're special, you're important. I want to know things about you for you, not for me. And so even when you're focusing on the other person, to focus on those things that they would want to share rather than you would want to hear.
Right. No, that's already
It's a high level.
a high level.
Right. Because it's very nuanced. You have to be very careful. Like, what does that mean? Oh my gosh. So much thought before you open your mouth.
Right.
Right.
But even from that's like first step, instead of talking, right? And I remember that happened to me, or I learned, you're talking about this. Yeah, I also learned that, whatever, kind of like shifting. Stay with the person, whatever they're talking about, stay with them. And I don't know which exactly the right question. That's already
we'll grow and we'll get more
we'll grow,
right, and we'll figure it out.
But at least to get to that space, consciously stay, let the person to feel that it's their time, their space, their some whatever. Yeah.
I also thought personally something that I shared that really I thought, well, I guess just because maybe my reality was how careful she was with other people's time. And I thought like how often, I don't know, you're on the phone with someone and then like, oh, just a minute, you have to go and take care of something. I mean, you do have to take care of it. You're not saying, oh, I don't mind wasting the other person's time, but still we allow ourselves to do that. Or you're going to the door, you're going to answer the phone, and then you have to stop and do something along the way because something grabs your attention and you just have to do it for a few seconds. I don't know. I just feel like, wait, no, like this idea of focusing on another person and recognizing it's an expression, it's an extension of being other focused, but it's a very specific extension, like really valuing someone else's time. I thought that was very, I don't know, maybe because I'm not so good with time. I was like, wow, that would be an amazing thing to work on, like an amazing thing to try to strive for, to really be very focused that when that time is valuable and another person's time is something I really don't want to waste. Anyone else had something from all the various thoughts and anecdotes I shared that they saw something they could strive for or would like to strive for, both for the Rebbetzins' merit that she lives on through us, and for our merit that we ascend to become more regal, more royalty, more noble by imitating her nobility. This is also a special time, as we've learned, that a yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of a very great person, we call in Hebrew a tzaddik, a very holy person, all of the good they've created their entire life is shining, and is shining in our world and creates salvation. So surely as we strive to make a bridge between ourselves and her, it's really helping this enormous energy of salvation come and be part of our life. I tried to share things that I thought really had a lot that we could really relate to, and that could really help us become, as I said, more noble, more refined, more royalty. She definitely embodied royalty, not a royalty with a crown on her head, but real royalty, Jewish royalty, Jewish nobility. And it's something every one of us, it says every one of us is God's princess. Every one of us also has royal blood. And I think as we watch, observe, and then try to emulate, this helps us access our own royalty as well. Thank you.